Things fall apart the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world.
The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. That's W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming.
It has to be one of the most famous openings, or almost openings, in all of English poetry. You see it everywhere. It's on tote bags. It's in political speeches. But when you actually stop and listen to those words, they feel heavy. They feel like a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Not of a person, but of an entire civilization.
Oh, it is a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it's probably the definitive mood of the whole era we're stepping into today. It just perfectly captures that specific, terrifying, but also kind of exhilarating moment in history when the world felt like it was fracturing.
Right.
When all the old rules just stopped applying and literature had to basically break itself just to keep up.
And we are talking, of course, about literary modernism.
We are, and we are going to try and do something a little bit difficult today. We're going to try to define a movement that is, famously resistant to definitions.
I have to be honest with you, right out of the gate here. When I see the words literary modernism, or I see names like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, I have two very distinct reactions.
Okay.
The first is, oh, very sophisticated, people smoking cigarettes in Paris cafes. It's all very chic. The second reaction is a mild panic attack.
A panic attack.
Yeah. I mean, I remember trying to read Ulysses in a college seminar I was definitely not prepared for, and I felt like I was having a stroke. It felt like the book was actively fighting me, like it was deliberately trying to make me feel stupid.
You are so not alone in that reaction, that disorientation, that feeling of what on earth is happening, where did the plot go, who is even talking right now. That's actually a huge part of what modernism is.
Really?
I would argue that if you felt confused, you were reading it correctly.
That is both very comforting to hear and also a little counterintuitive. I mean, usually if I'm confused, I assume the writer failed.
And in any other era, you might be right. But for today, our mission is to strip away that whole intimidation factor. We're going to take this huge stack of sources. We have essays on defining the movement, transcripts about the shift from Victorian to modern thought, overviews of all the key figures, and we are just going to unpack what modernism actually is.
Okay.
We want to get past all the academic jargon and really look at it as a very human response to a world that suddenly, profoundly stopped making sense.
So this isn't just about hard books for the sake of being hard. This is about a complete overhaul of how humans understand reality, time, even themselves.
Precisely. It is about that moment when humanity looked in the mirror and realized the reflection was cracked. And instead of trying to, glue the mirror back together, the artist decided to paint the cracks.
I love that image. Okay, so let's dive in. We have a lot of ground to cover: history, philosophy, psychology, and some very strange books. Where do we even begin with a topic this massive?
We have to start with context. You just can't understand the books unless you understand the world that made them. And the very first thing we have to clear up, because our sources really, really hammer this home, is the difference between modernization and modernism.
Right. And I think most people, myself included, probably use those interchangeably.
Huh.
Modern just means new, technological.
In casual conversation, sure. But in this context, they're almost opposing forces, actually. Think of it this way. Modernization is the hardware.
The hardware. The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. It's the factories, the steam engines, the telegraphs, the explosive growth of cities. It's the fact that you can suddenly travel across the country in a matter of hours instead of days.
So it's the noise and the speed.
It is the noise of the city and the speed of the machine. It's the Industrial Revolution hitting its absolute peak.
Okay, so modernization is the train rushing through the countryside at 60 miles an hour.
Yes. And modernism, on the other hand, is the software. It's the aesthetic response to that train. It's the music, the painting, the writing that tries to process what it feels like to be standing next to that train.
That's a great analogy. So modernization is the noise, and modernism is the music written to make sense of all that noise.
Or to reflect the chaos of the noise, because here's the crucial part. If the world around you is screeching and clanging and moving at this breakneck speed, a beautiful, harmonious, neatly structured symphony, well, it might not feel true anymore.
It would feel like a lie, a bit of a fantasy, nostalgia.
Exactly. Modernism is the attempt to create an art form that is as complex, as fast, and as fractured as the modern world itself.
Now, in terms of the timeline,
Hmm.
historians always love to argue out the dates. But looking at our stack, we're roughly talking about the late 19th century up until World War II.
That's the broad stroke, yes. Let's say roughly the 1890s to the 1940s. But there is a nuance there that's important. There's this fascinating kind of shady area from about 1890 to 1914 that scholars often call early modernism. And that's where you start to see the cracks forming. You see writers like, say, Joseph Conrad or Henry James starting to question the old ways of telling stories.
But the dam hasn't quite broken yet.
Not yet. The real explosion, the heyday, what we call high modernism, that is arguably from 1914, the start of World War I, to about 1939, the start of World War II.
So the interwar period between the wars, that makes a lot of sense. It feels like the pressure cooker of the 20th century.
It is, but to really get why the art changed so drastically, we have to look at a much, much longer arc of history. One of our sources, a transcript from a lecture by the scholar John Bishop, outlines this incredible shift in the very concept of authority.
So I marked this section. This was fascinating to me because it zooms out so far. He talks about authority moving downward and inward.
Right, and it's a process that takes centuries. I mean, think about the Middle Ages. Where did authority come from? Where did truth with a capital T come from?
From the sky. It came from God, or it came from the king who's, appointed by God.
Correct. Truth was external. It was objective. It came from above, handed down to you by the priest or the monarch. The world was hierarchical, and it was fixed. The sun revolved around the earth. The serf served the Lord served the king served God. Everyone knew their place in the system.
It was rigid, for sure, but I have to imagine it was also secure. You didn't have to wake up every morning and figure out the meaning of life from scratch.
There is a great security in that certainty. But then we get the Protestant Reformation.
Which is, 300 years before modernism?
It is, but it plants a crucial seed. The Reformation basically said, you don't need the priest to interpret the Bible for you. You can read it yourself.
So authority moves from the institution to the individual.
Exactly. The individual becomes the interpreter. And once you start interpreting the Bible for yourself, it's a slippery slope. Eventually, you start interpreting reality for yourself. By the time we get to the late 19th and early 20th century, authority has moved almost entirely inward. It's located in the individual mind.
And that has to be a heavy burden, right? If truth isn't coming from the sky anymore, you have to make it up yourself.
It is an incredibly heavy burden. It creates a kind of existential vertigo. And that huge philosophical shift is mirrored in the social changes of the time, what's called the Great Transformation. We moved from a feudal rural society where everyone knew their place to these massive anonymous cities.
The urbanization piece is huge. You go from a village where you know everyone's name and their family history to a city like London, where you're passing thousands of complete strangers on the street every single day.
And that creates this profound sense of isolation, even when you're surrounded by millions of people. But there was another point in the research that I thought illustrated this shift from concrete to abstract just beautifully. It was the etymology of the word fee.
Yes.
Yes.
The origin of money. I had no idea about this. It's a perfect metaphor.
Isn't it? So the word fee, as in a fee you pay a lawyer, it comes from the old German word wie.
Which means cattle.
Right. Because originally value was concrete. It was a cow. You traded one cow for a certain amount of grain. It was a real breathing, mooing unit of value. You could touch it, you could milk it.
And then we moved to coins. And then eventually paper money.
Which is an abstract symbol of value. A $10 bill isn't worth $10 of paper. It's just a symbol that we've all agreed represents value. We moved from the cow to the symbol of the cow.
And then, we moved to numbers in a ledger. And now it's just digital numbers on a screen. It gets more and more abstract.
Which is a perfect parallel for what happens in literature. We move from concrete stories, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, to abstract symbols and fragments. We move from the literary cow to the literary dollar bill. From the realistic description to the symbolic image.
It feels like we traded reality for a representation of reality.
And that creates anxiety. Is this paper money really worth anything? Is this word I'm using really connected to the thing it describes? That anxiety is the absolute heartbeat of modernism. It's the fear that the symbol has become detached from the reality.
There was another anecdote in the source material about the invention of childhood and John Locke that I thought was really telling. It's another one of these big mindset shifts.
Oh, the swaddling clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. So pre-modernity, babies were literally swaddled, wrapped up tight like little mummies, so they would sit still.
Because the belief was that a child was this sort of wild, unformed raw material. You had to physically restrict them to mold them into a proper human shape. You told them the rules, you imposed the form from the outside.
And then John Locke comes along during the Enlightenment and says, no, unwrap the kid.
He argues that the child learns through experience, the tabula rasa, the blank slate.
You have to let them touch the hot stove.
Exactly. Let them burn their finger. Experience becomes the teacher, not the rule book.
And that is modern literature in a nutshell, isn't it? It's not an author standing above you saying, this is good, this is bad, here is the moral of the story. It's the author saying, here is the raw experience of the burn. You figure out what it means.
Precisely. The modernist writer absolutely refuses to swaddle the reader. They treat you like an adult who has to navigate the danger and the confusion for yourself.
Okay, so we have this massive shift in authority, this move toward abstraction, and this new emphasis on direct experience. But to really see how radical this was, we have to look at what's been called the Great Rupture, because modernism really defines itself by what it's not.
It defines itself by rejecting the old way.
And the old way here is realism. The 19th century novel, we're talking about Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Jane Austen.
The giants. And look, we love Dickens, we love Austen, but we have to understand that realism as a form operates on a very specific philosophical assumption that language is a clear window.
Like a clear window.
Or a mirror. The idea is that words equal reality. If I write, the house was red with a slate roof, the assumption is that you, the reader, can see exactly the same red house that I, the writer, see. The language is treated as if it's transparent.
And what about the narrator?
The narrator is basically God, the omniscient narrator. They hover above the story. They know everything. They know what every character is thinking. They know what's happening in the next town over. And most importantly, they know what is right and what is wrong.
They're your guide. They hold your hand through the story.
They do. And they wrap it all up in a neat linear plot. There's a beginning, a rising action, a climax, a resolution.
And usually a marriage at the end.
Usually a marriage, or at least a very clear moral lesson. The source material mentioned Jane Eyre. In that world, you know exactly how much a woman is allowed to scream before she gets locked in the attic. The social rules are clear, and the narrative rules are clear.
It's a safe, ordered universe. I mean, even if bad things happen, they happen for a reason, and the story makes sense of them for you.
It is a universe of cause and effect, and then the 20th century happened.
Things fall apart.
World War I. You really cannot overstate the psychological impact of the First World War. You have to remember, the Victorians believed in progress with a capital P. They believed technology and science were making the world better, cleaner, more rational.
And then that exact same technology, chemistry, engineering, industrial manufacturing, is used to create mustard gas, machine guns, and trench warfare on an unimaginable scale.
Suddenly you have an entire generation of young men dying in the mud for reasons that no one can quite explain. It wasn't some heroic cavalry charge. It was industrial slaughter. It was random. It was chaotic. And it was fragmented.
So if you're a writer in, say, 1920, and you try to write a nice, linear story with a happy ending where the good guys win and the moral is crystal clear,
it feels like a lie. It feels like a childish fantasy. The modernists looked at the form of realism and said, this isn't what life is like anymore. Life isn't a neat linear progression toward a happy marriage. Life is a chaotic, fragmented mess where you might die for no reason at all.
So they had to break the mirror.
They had to break the mirror to show the cracks in the world. And interestingly, they didn't just do this in books. They actually did it in painting first.
Right. The sources bring up the visual arts, Impressionism and Cubism. This really helped me visualize the literary shift.
Oh, visual art is so often the canary in the coal mine for these things. Look at someone like Monet. Impressionism.
Monet didn't paint a boat, right? That was the example.
He painted the perception of the boat. He painted the light hitting the water at a specific moment. If you get right up close to a Monet, it's just these blurry dabs of paint. It's not realistic in a photographic sense, but it's incredibly realistic to how the human eye actually perceives light and color in a fleeting moment.
So it's prioritizing the subjective experience over the objective object.
Exactly. And then Picasso comes along and just takes a sledgehammer to the entire concept of perspective.
Cubism.
Cubism is the perfect visual metaphor for modernist writing. Before Picasso, a portrait was painted from one angle. You stood here, the model stood there. It's a fixed perspective.
The camera on a tripod.
Yes. But Picasso said, wait a minute, in real life, I move around, I see the front of your face, but I also know what your profile looks like. I've seen the back of your head. So he decided to paint the woman from 5 different angles simultaneously, all flattened onto a single canvas.
Which is why it looks so weird and distorted.
Yeah.
The nose is on the side, one eye is looking one way, the other is somewhere else.
It looks distorted if you're expecting a photograph. But Picasso would argue it is more true than a photograph, because it captures the totality of the object across time and space, not just one frozen, arbitrary snapshot.
And that's exactly what the writers tried to do. They tried to show multiple perspectives at once. They tried to flatten time onto the page.
They did. They wanted to capture the texture of consciousness itself. They wanted to write the way the mind actually works, not the way a grammar textbook says it's supposed to work.
Which brings us to the famous or, infamous modernist toolkit. The actual techniques they use to break the story apart. And the big one, the one everyone knows, is stream of consciousness.
Yes. This is the hallmark technique.
Okay, so define this for me. Because I think sometimes people just use it to mean rambling.
It can definitely feel like rambling, but it's actually a very rigorous, very deliberate attempt to represent thought as it happens. I mean, think about how you actually think. Do you think in full, grammatically correct sentences with commas and periods all in the right place?
No way. It's more like flashes, like hungry, sandwich. Wait, did I leave the stove on? That cloud looks like a duck. My foot itches. Oh, right, I need to call my mom.
Exactly. It's associative, it's chaotic. It jumps from memory to sensation to anxiety in a split second. A realist novel would write, he felt hungry, and then he wondered if he had left the stove on. Modernism just writes the raw feed.
And Freud is the godfather of this, right? His ideas are floating around everywhere at this point.
He is the shadow hanging over all of this. I mean, Freud showed us that the mind is layered. There's the conscious part, the tiny tip of the iceberg, but then there's this vast, dark ocean of the unconscious underneath. All of our memories, repressions, desires, fears, stream of consciousness tries to dip a bucket into that ocean.
And we have 2 major examples of this in the sources, James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. But they do it very differently.
Very differently. Joyce is, well, he's the extreme case. Ulysses. Specifically, the very end of the book, Molly Bloom's soliloquy. It's pages and pages and pages of completely unpunctuated text. It is the raw data of a mind drifting into sleep. It flows like water, hence the term stream.
It's overwhelming to read.
It's meant to be. It's probably the closest literature has ever come to literally being inside another person's brain. Joyce is giving you the raw, unfiltered data.
Now, Woolf is different. Her stream of consciousness feels more curated.
Mrs. Dalloway. Yes, Woolf is more controlled. She doesn't usually remove all the punctuation. Instead, she uses this incredible fluid camera technique. She just moves in and out of people's heads.
Like a ghost floating through London.
That's a great way to put it. You'll be on a street in London. A car backfires. The narrative dips into Clarissa Dalloway's thoughts, and she thinks, oh, maybe it's the Queen's car. Then seamlessly, without a chapter break or anything, you just drift into the mind of Septimus Smith.
The shell-shocked WWI veteran.
Right, and he hears that same backfire and thinks it's a cannon. He thinks the world is ending.
The same exact event, but 2 totally different, separate realities.
And that highlights that subjectivity we talked about. It shows us that we are all locked inside our own heads, perceiving the world completely differently, even when we are standing on the same sidewalk.
So that brings us to another tool in the kit, fragmentation, or as the sources call it, collage.
This connects right back to that loss of authority. If there is no single overarching truth with a capital T, then you can't write a single unified story anymore. All you have are the pieces, the fragments.
And the source material points to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland as the prime example here. That line, a heap of broken images.
The Wasteland is the masterpiece of fragmentation. It doesn't have a single narrator. The voice shifts constantly. It quotes snippets of Dante and Shakespeare and Hindu scripture, and then conversations overheard in a bar and popular songs of the day.
It's like spinning a radio dial. You get a second of static, then classical music, then a news report, then some jazz, more static, a bit of a sermon.
That is a perfect analogy. It is a pastiche. And the argument is, this is what modern life feels like. We are bombarded with information from everywhere, all out of context. So the only honest art form is one that reflects that brokenness.
And there was a visual analogy for this one too, the Picasso bull's head. I love this story.
Yes, this is a famous sculpture. So Picasso took an old discarded bicycle seat and a pair of rusty handlebars.
Basically 2 pieces of junk.
And he just put them together. The seat became the face of the bull and the handlebars became the horns.
And suddenly you see it. You see a bull's head.
Right. He didn't sit down and sculpt a bull out of a block of marble. He took two pre-existing manufactured objects fragments of the industrial world, and by placing them together in a new way, he created a completely new meaning.
So that's what Eliot is doing. He's taking a fragment of Shakespeare and a fragment of a nursery rhyme, jamming them together, and creating a new meaning from the collision.
Exactly. It's the art of juxtaposition. The meaning doesn't live in the fragments themselves. It comes from the spark that jumps between them.
Now, I have to play the role of the frustrated reader here again.
Yeah.
Because when you describe all this spinning radio dials, bicycle seats, unpunctuated thoughts, it all sounds hard.
It is hard.
And that's the most common complaint, right? Why do I have to work so hard to read a book? Why is this author trying to make me feel stupid?
And the modernist answer to that is, essentially, because life is hard. T.S. Eliot was very explicit about this. He wrote an essay where he basically said that modern civilization is complex and difficult, so the art that represents it must also be complex and difficult.
So the difficulty is a feature, not a bug.
It's a requirement. If a book is easy, a modernist would probably say it's lying to you. It's simplifying a world that is not simple. They wanted an active reader. They didn't want you to just sit back and passively consume a story like you're watching television. They wanted you to participate in making the meaning.
You have to build the bull's head yourself.
You do. You have to connect the dots. And they believe that the effort, that struggle, is what makes the meaning more valuable. You own it because you worked for it.
Okay, let's unpack this idea of language itself a bit more, because one of the big sections in our outline is the linguistic turn. And the phrase, words are not things, keeps coming up over and over.
This is the philosophical bedrock of so much of modernism. And we have to thank Friedrich Nietzsche for a lot of this.
The God is dead guy.
The very same. But beyond theology, Nietzsche's big contribution here was questioning language itself. He pointed out that language is fundamentally arbitrary.
Arbitrary.
It's made up.
Meaning, there is no actual essential connection between the word tree and the big wooden object with leaves growing outside your window. The sound tree is just a noise we make with our mouths. We could have all agreed to call it glorp.
Okay, sure. But we all agree that the sound tree means the wooden thing, so it works.
It works fine for tree. But what about abstract concepts? What about the word justice? What about truth? What about human? That's where it gets a lot more sticky.
That is where it gets dangerous. And the sources bring up a really powerful political angle here. Throughout history, the word human has been defined in ways that specifically exclude entire groups of people. Slaves were defined by law and science as not fully human. Indigenous people were called savages.
So the label you use actually determines their reality.
Yes. If language is made up, then our reality is, in a very real sense, made up. And if the people in power get to define the words, then they get to define reality. The modernists became obsessed with this. They realized that language isn't a clear window, it's a filter. It shapes everything we see.
And it can distort what we see.
Profoundly. So what you start to see is writers engaging in something called self-reflexivity. It means the book knows it's a book. It constantly draws attention to the fact that you are reading words on a page. It doesn't let you just get lost in the illusion of the story.
It's like when a character in a movie turns and looks directly at the camera.
Exactly. It's breaking the fourth wall. And Finnegan's Wake, Joyce's last book, is the ultimate example of this. It pushes language to the absolute brink of sense. It's full of puns in dozens of languages, made-up words, portmanteaus. It's almost unintelligible.
It sounds like he's trying to break language itself just to see what's inside it.
He said he was trying to create a night language, a language for dreams, because he felt that standard English, the language of the day, of commerce, of science, just wasn't enough to capture the reality of the unconscious. He had to invent a new language for a new reality.
So we have a broken world, we have broken narratives, and we even have broken words. What on earth does that do to the characters? Who is the hero of a modernist novel?
Well, he certainly isn't a knight in shining armor.
No, I'm guessing not.
The modernist subject is often called the divided self. I mean, in the 19th century, the hero controlled his destiny, he made choices, he acted upon the world.
He went out and conquered.
The modernist hero is often impotent, paralyzed, fragmented.
The source material brings up J. Alfred Prufrock from Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
He is the absolute poster child for modernist anxiety. He wants to talk to a woman, maybe propose, maybe just have a meaningful conversation. But he is so paralyzed by self-consciousness, by the fear of being judged and misunderstood, that he can't even dare to eat a peach.
He's just trapped inside his own head.
Completely. He says at one point, "It is impossible to say just what I mean." That is the great modernist cry, the failure of communication, the terrible fear that even if I manage to speak, you won't understand me, because we're living in fundamentally different worlds.
And then you have someone like Jay Gatsby. He's a bit different. He's more active.
Gatsby is a fascinating case. His story is really an investigation into the failure of the American dream. He's always chasing that green light at the end of the dot.
Which represents Daisy, or
Nope.
money, or the past.
It represents meaning itself, fulfillment, completeness. But notice, it is always just out of reach. You can see it, but you can't grasp it. Gatsby constructs this whole elaborate persona. He literally makes himself up. But he's hollow in the middle. He's a fragmented man desperately trying to appear whole.
And where do these fragmented people live? It seems like they always live in the city.
The city is the other main character in modernism. It's Dublin in Ulysses. It's London in Mrs. Dalloway. It's Paris for the American expatriates.
And we get this figure of the flaneur.
The flaneur, the wanderer, the observer, the person who walks the city streets not to get somewhere, but just to see what happens.
It really seems like all these books just involve people walking around. Clarissa walks to the florist. Leopold Bloom walks all over Dublin.
Walking is the engine of thought in these books. The external movement, walking past a shop window, seeing a beggar, hearing a clock chime, triggers the internal reflection. The city acts as a kind of stimulus machine for the brain.
But the city itself isn't objective, is it?
Never. In modernism, the city is always filtered through the character's mood. If Septimus Smith is terrified from his wartime trauma, then London is a hellscape of threatening shadows and screaming monsters. If Clarissa Dalloway is feeling happy and alive, then London is this sparkling, vibrant playground.
So its beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but taken to an extreme psychological level.
Exactly. There is no one London. There is only my London and your London, and they might not look anything alike.
Okay, so if everyone is trapped in their own head, and language is slippery, and God is gone, is there any meaning left at all? Or is it all just depressing nihilism?
That is the big question, and the modernist answer is sort of.
Sort of.
Right.
Great. I was really hoping for a definitive yes.
Modernism is a quest for meaning, but it's a quest that is acutely aware that it might fail.
There was a parable in the Bishop transcript that really stuck with me, the Pisgah site.
Yes. This comes up in Ulysses. It refers to the biblical story of Moses.
Right. Moses leads his people through the desert for 40 years.
And he gets them right to the edge of the promised land. He climbs Mount Pisgah, and God allows him to see the land of milk and honey. He can see it all laid out before him, but he is not allowed to enter. He dies there on the mountain.
He sees it, but he can't possess it.
That is the modernist condition. We can stand on the mountain of art. We can use these symbols and fragments to catch a glimpse of a unified truth, a moment of perfect clarity and meaning. But we can never live there. We can never fully possess the meaning.
We just get glimpses.
We get epiphanies.
That's a term from Joyce, right?
It is. Joyce defined the epiphany as a sudden spiritual manifestation in an ordinary object or a vulgar moment.
So, not a burning bush, not a lightning bolt from the sky.
No, a woman's laugh, a clock striking noon, a dead bird on the beach.
In Mrs. Dalloway, the entire plot is literally just her buying flowers and throwing a dinner party.
And yet, within that completely trivial day, she experiences the entire depth of human existence. Love, regret, aging, death, joy. The modernist argument is that the meaning of life isn't found in the big plot twists, the dragon fight or the royal wedding. The meaning is hidden in the texture of the ordinary moment.
That feels... Well, it feels very spiritual, but in a totally secular way.
It is. It's an attempt to find the sacred in a world that has killed all the gods. It's trying to resacralize the everyday.
But then something happens. This movement, this whole way of seeing the world, it seems to come to an end.
The center falls apart again.
World War II.
If World War I cracked the mirror, World War II just smashed it into dust. The Holocaust, the atomic bomb, the sheer scale of that atrocity, that industrialized evil, made the modernist hope seem... well, naive.
Naive. But modernism was so dark and cynical.
It was cynical about society, sure, but it still fundamentally believed that art could save us. It believed that if we could just find the right form, the right myth, the right sentence, we could shore up the ruins. We could make sense of the chaos.
But after Auschwitz...
After Auschwitz, the idea that high art could save civilization seemed almost obscene. The Nazis loved art. They listened to Beethoven and Wagner while running the death camps. Art didn't stop the horror.
And this leads us directly to postmodernism.
Which is a whole other deep dive we have planned, but the transition is crucial. Modernism mourns the fragmentation. It sees the broken vase and it desperately tries to glue the pieces back together, even if it knows the cracks will always show.
So it's sad about the brokenness.
Postmodernism looks at the pile of broken shards on the floor and says, hey, look at all these cool, shiny pieces, let's play with them.
So if I'm getting this right, modernism is the tragedy of the broken world,
Hmm.
and postmodernism is the comedy, or maybe the irony of it.
Precisely. Postmodernism stops trying to find the deep meaning. It surrenders to the surface. It happily mixes high art and pop culture. It mocks the very idea of a masterpiece.
Nothing is new anymore.
Exactly. But modernism. Modernism was the last great heroic struggle to make it new, to make it all mean something.
Okay, so as we wrap this up, let's try to summarize this massive movement. If literary modernism had a manifesto, what would its core principles be?
Based on everything we've read, I think it would go something like this.
Reality is not a clear window. It is a cracked mirror.
The omniscient narrator is dead. There is no single authoritative voice that knows everything.
Okay, and 3 would be, time isn't a straight line. It's a fluid river of memory and consciousness.
Yes. 4. Difficulty is honest. Easy answers are lies.
And 5, maybe that we're all alone in our own heads, but art is the bridge that tries, however imperfectly, to connect us.
I think that's it. It's a brave movement. When you look at it that way, it stared into the abyss and it tried to write down what it saw.
So here's the final thought I want to leave everyone with. We've been talking about this as history, the 1920s, the 1930s, but I want you to think about our world right now.
Okay.
We are constantly bombarded by information. We are fragmented by a dozen different screens. We don't trust authority figures. The very idea of truth feels slippery, like fake news versus real news.
We are living in a hyper-accelerated, digitized version of the modernist nightmare.
Exactly. So the question is this. If modernism was the artistic reaction to the loss of a shared authority, and we still have no shared authority, in fact, we have less than ever, are we actually still modernists?